I'd like to begin our program entitled The Heritage of Abraham by sharing a story with you. It's a little anecdotal story, I think, that will help to explain what I'm about to share in the program. It's a story about a man, a father, who only had a son. He did not have his wife or other children any longer. And he was a wealthy man. He had been successful in his business, and he was a man of faith. He was devoted to the Lord, studied his Bible, and tried to encourage his son in the faith. Now, his son, on the other hand, was somewhat rebellious and didn't share the same enthusiasm for the faith that his father had. He was interested in getting his inheritance and moving on with his life and doing what he wanted to do, go his way. Well, as the occasion happened, the father did pass away. The son came to the executor of the estate, expecting to receive his inheritance, and instead, the executor simply handed him his father's Bible and said to him, this is what he was instructed to do. The son was very disappointed. He took the Bible, he went home, and proceeded to, without the benefit of his father's inheritance, to live his life. He married, had children, and it was many years later that he was reminiscing and going through some old things, and he found his father's Bible again. He opened it and discovered there was an envelope in it. The envelope contained the instructions for how the son was to go and to receive his inheritance, that the entire inheritance had been left to him, but that he had missed out because he had not opened the book to find out what was in it. The same can be said about a lot of Christians today. There's an inheritance that is in the book that comes from our father, Abraham. Abraham is the father of our faith, and he's left us an inheritance, but a lot of brethren don't know about it. They're going through their life attempting to do the best they can without the inheritance that comes from Abraham. In this program, I want to share with you about this inheritance. I want to share with you, what did Abraham really provide for us? But to begin and to do that correctly, we're going to have to cover a couple of definitions. First of all, I have to explain to you that our father Abraham was the first Hebrew. We get that term because when Abraham went into the land where God had sent him, he had crossed over a river, and the people there in the land, they noticed that Abraham was different. And so he explained to him that he was Hebrew. He was from across the river, and that's what Hebrew means. I'm not from here, I'm from across the river. Abraham was not a Jew. The term Jew doesn't show up until much, much later. Abraham was a Hebrew. And so this heritage that I'm going to talk to you about is a Hebraic heritage. It's a heritage from the Hebrews, not necessarily from the Jews. We'll learn about that a little bit later on. The world today, however, has been defined for us by most people as being separated between Jews and Gentiles. Amongst the Gentiles, we have some Christians and non-Christians. And we are told by folks that Jews don't believe in Jesus. They're not Christians, and Christians don't do Jewish things because those are separate. Jews and Gentiles are separate. Where the rub comes in, where the confusion comes in, is when you have somebody like me, a Messianic Jew. I come from a Jewish background, but I believe in the Messiah, the same person the Christians believe to be the Christ. And so that becomes the anomaly, that becomes the confusing point, and as others come into the Messianic faith, whether they come from a Gentile background or a Jewish background, people become confused because it doesn't fit the mold of the world being divided into just Jews and Gentiles. I want to give you a new definition for the world, the one that comes from the Scriptures. There really were Hebrews first. And Hebrew is the first definition that the Bible gives to us of those that belong to the Lord. Abraham, as I said to you, was not a Jew. He was a Hebrew. The actual term Jew first comes to us in the Scripture from the story of Esther. And Esther, in the story of that, talks about Mordecai, who was a Jew who had to deal with Haman, who was an enemy of the Jews. The first prophet that ever discusses about the Jewish people or the Jews is Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is making reference to the people who live in the land of Judea, under the house of Judah. Not all of Israel, just a segment of them, and they're referred to as the Jews. The Gospel of John talks about the Jews, and it's really referring to those people that lived in Jerusalem. Isn't necessarily talking about the tribe of Judah. It's talking about the southern kingdom, the house of Judah that was separate from the house of Israel, that is part of the history of Israel. So, therefore, I'm going to walk you through a definition of how the Bible actually gets us down from Hebrew to Jew so that you can have a sense of where does this term actually come from. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all Hebrews. There was no Jews at that point. In fact, it wasn't until Jacob's name was changed to Israel that we even hear about the name Israel. Israel was the alternate name that was given to Jacob, and thus all of his sons, the sons of Jacob, became the sons of Israel. And their descendants became known as the children of Israel. When we had Moses and the Exodus from Egypt come forth, it wasn't Jews who came forth, it was the children of Israel that came forth, and they were all Hebrews that came forth. And by the way, not all those that came out of Egypt were physical descendants of Jacob alone. The scripture says it was a mixed multitude. There were many people who joined with the Hebrew people and became a part of what we know to be Israel. They were all numbered with the tribes of Israel. And at this point, we still don't have any Jews yet until we get into the land. After the children of Israel made their way into the land of Israel, the promised land, they were under the rule of the judges, and then eventually under the rule of kings. King Saul, King David, King Solomon. And after that, there was a division in the land of Israel. The southern tribes, led by the house of David, which was King David and King Solomon, they became the leaders of the house of Judah, and the people that lived in the land of Judea then began to be known as Jews, a shortened term for those of the tribe of Judah and for the land of Judea. Whereas those that were to the north, led by the tribe of Ephraim, they were still known as Hebrews and still known as Israelites. So the term Jew had to do with the locality of a part of the Hebrew people. Let me summarize for you a term to explain this so you have a clear definition. All Jews are part of the Hebrew people and part of Israel. But not all Hebrews and all those of Israel are Jews. That's the simple definition. So if you super simplify, as the world has already done, say there's just Jews and Gentiles, that would be incorrect. That does not line up with the biblical story or the biblical history that we have in the faith. So if we're going to return back to the heritage of Abraham, we're going to have to change some definitions and go back and define who people are based on what the scripture says in the original promises, not necessarily what the worldly traditional model is called. Messianics do this. Messianics are returning to the biblical definition of God's people, being first Hebrews by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the children of Israel, the mixed multitude of those of the house of Jacob, and then down into the further definition before we get to Jews. I myself am a descendant that comes down through the Jewish line, through the house of David. And given that my last name is Judah, that's a pretty good indicator that I'm part of that. But I don't know for certain about that. But I think that's what it is. That's what my family thinks it is. But that gives me no advantage, or for that matter, disadvantage with regard to being a part of Abraham. And you, whether you are Jewish or not Jewish, it doesn't affect your heritage in Abraham at all. The heritage of Abraham is precedent setting for the definition of being a Jewish person.